went looking for trouble. And boy, I found her. She's in love with herself. She likes the dark. Grey Wolf Studios.
What's up, guys? It's me, Grey Wolf, back here to do another video for you. This is another video on my multi-part video series on intro to electric RCs for beginners. I'm trying to make this as comprehensive as possible for people just getting into the hobby, or maybe you've been in the nitro side of the hobby for a while and you're just now getting into electrics. So I'm trying to break it all down for you. This is mostly geared for beginners, though, so if you've been in the hobby for a while, especially on the electric side of things, you're probably not going to get a lot out of this, although you may get a little bit because I do touch on some intermediate topics here and there, but most of it's geared for beginners. So anyway, this is my video on transmitters, and this shouldn't be too long of a video, but this is my most used transmitter that I own. It's a FlySky GT3B. I am primarily a basher. I don't do a lot of racing, so for bashing purposes, I find this to be an excellent kit. Or not a kit, I'm sorry, but an excellent transmitter and receiver. This can be purchased at hobbyparts.com for $40 with a receiver. Additional receivers are only, I believe, $7.50 a piece, $7.50 a piece. You really can't beat the price. Granted, it's not the highest quality controller in the world, but there are a couple of mods that you can do to it to help improve the quality and just the overall feel of it. I do have videos on some of the various mods that I've done to this, like I did convert it to use LiPo batteries instead of AA's. I did mod the steering wheel here. Sorry, one of my batteries just finished balancing. I did mod the steering wheel here with the bearing inside, the stock, and there's the other battery. The stock transmitter actually has a bushing down inside the steering wheel, and you can actually take that out and replace it with a bearing, which I highly recommend doing because it feels so much more smooth and controllable. Even though I do mention in my bearing mod video, I do mention the fact that at first I was very unsure of this mod, and I did voice my concerns on that in that video. But having used this for, I don't know, I've had this modded with the bearing for probably close to a year now, I would think, and I absolutely love it now that I've gotten used to it. The problem before was just that I wasn't used to it. It does change the feel of the steering wheel. I mean, it works perfectly fine, but it does change the feel. And if you're used to using the stock one already, it can throw you for a loop at first. But anyway, enough about that. I do have an aftermarket wheel grip on here. This is my purple metallic creature wheel grip. I actually have probably 9 or 10 different custom made one-of-a-kind wheel grips. And if you're interested in these, I can tell you where to get more of them, or I can tell you where to get them for your controller. And these fit most standard controllers. There's most of the people that I've seen that have bought them for a whole slew of different transmitters. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Anyway, this video is going to be on transmitters, so we're going to go over the basic settings on a transmitter and kind of what they all do. So I'll just turn mine on here real quick. This particular transmitter does have a 10 model memory. So as you can see, I can click on here and I can go through the different ones. Model number 1 I have set up for my double XL. 2 I have set up for my OFNA 9.5 MBX, and I have a third one here set up for my high-speed Rustler. I have a fourth one set up for my electric LST2, and I haven't set anything up for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 yet. So anyway, this particular one does allow you, as you can see, let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. I'm trying to keep my LED lighting from glaring off of the screen. So okay, so anyway, most of your newer ones do actually give you a voltage readout of your pack, your battery pack for the transmitter. Like I said, I am using a 3S LiPo in here, so currently right now mine reads 3.12, or I'm sorry, 12.8 volts. This particular controller right here gives you the option to name each model memory. Most of them do that. Then there is a reverse function, so you can reverse the inputs for whatever servo you're working on. For example, let's say you you get your electric and you get your motor and everything hooked up, and the motor's spinning the wrong direction. It's going in reverse when you press when you pull back on the trigger to accelerate. Well, you can come in here and you can change the channel that controls that would be channel 2, so you can come in here and control that. You can change channel 2. If it's set normal, just change it to reverse and it'll reverse it, and the other way around too. If it's already on reverse, then change it back to normal and it'll change the direction. Same thing with, you can control you can reverse all 3 channels. Channel 1 is always, at least for ground vehicles, channel 1 is always going to be your steering servo. Channel 2 is going to be your ESC, and channel 3 is typically, if your vehicle has reverse, it's typically a reverse. If not, if it doesn't have reverse, then you can, a lot of times channel 3 just isn't used, or you can use it for other things if you happen to have, let's say you have an extra fan, you buy a fan for your motor or whatever. Well, you need a place to hook it up. You could plug it into channel 3 or whatever device you want. Moving on from that, you have endpoint adjustments. Endpoint adjustments basically allows you to define where your servo stops moving, its maximum, in its travel. If a back out here for a second. If a servo is centered perfectly, if your servo is centered perfectly and you're turning the wheel, and let's say that your full travel is something like in this direction or whatever, and let's say you can achieve your full turn rate without necessarily turning the steering wheel all the way to the left, then what happens is, if you continue to turn the steering wheel once your servo has reached the end of its travel range, the servo is actually going to push and harder to try to make it to continue to move. Well, what this will cause to happen is it'll cause your servo to burn out eventually. So if you notice that you know, if you notice that your tires or whatever reach the maximum travel before the steering wheel reaches, you know, its maximum travel in the same direction, then you might want to consider setting some endpoints, um, you know, for your steering servo. And you can set endpoints for all three channels, just like you can everything else. Um, it's, you know, endpoints are pretty easy. It's really about all there is to that. Then you got trim. You have a trim for, at least this controller has a trim for all three channels. Most controllers do. And essentially what that does is it just kind of tweaks the channel a little bit in one direction or another. Example, let's say you know, you're hooking up your steering servo, and you know, your wheels are, you know, pointing perfectly straight, and you know, your steering linkage is perfectly straight, and your, you know, your arm that connects to that steering linkage, that, you know, that connects the steering linkage to the servo, let's say it's, you know, at a perfect right angle. Well, okay, actually, if we needed to use trim, it wouldn't be at a perfect right angle. Let's say your servo horn is, you know, ideally your servo horn, when you put it on the servo and it's connected to the steering linkage, it should be at perfect right angles. Well, typically what happens is it's not. Your servo horn ends up being cocked just a little bit to one side or the other from being dead center. Now this doesn't always happen, but occasionally it does. Well, if that's the case, then basically you just get it as close to centered as possible, and then you would use, since steering is controlled by channel 1, you would use your channel 1 trim to gradually nudge it back to where it is actually sitting perfectly centered. That's basically what trim does. Then we have our next thing is dual rate, which is indicated with just a D/R here. Well, although it does say dual rate underneath it, if you guys can see that. But dual rate is essentially, it essentially limits, um, it limits the maximum amount of servo moving that is done. Like for instance, my high-speed Rustler is capable of speeds of over 100 miles an hour. So I have the dual rate for steering set at 70%. And what happens is when I move my steering wheel 100% to the left, my tires have only moved 70% of their entire range of motion. Now, what this does is it makes, basically it makes the steering much less touchy. I can actually, the steering's more forgiving. I can move the steering wheel a little bit more than normal, and I won't get as quick of a response. Essentially, that's how that works. Now, that's an example for steering. Now, dual rate, setting your dual rate for, well, I don't really, you can set your dual rate less than 100% from channel 2, but I don't know why you would want to, because that would just limit your maximum amount of power that you can get out of the motor. And then channel 3 just depends on what you're using channel 3 for. But anyway, moving on past dual rate, exponential. Now, exponential is a highly misunderstood, it's a highly misunderstood setting on controllers, and I myself even had to do a little bit of research to kind of figure out what it is, because I typically really have not had a need to use it, because it's actually mostly used in airplanes, from what I understand. Now there are cases where I guess you would want to you could use it in on ground vehicles as well. But essentially, what it does is it's reminiscent of it's kind of like dual rate in the sense that it limits response, but it does it in a slightly different way. So if I turn my dual rate down to 70%, I'm only going to get 70% of my movement. Let's go with the steering servo for example for a second. The dual rate is going to limit my servo travel to 70% of maximum, but during that 70% movement, it's going to be completely linear. Basically meaning, if I turn the steering wheel 2 millimeters to the left from center, it's going to turn the same amount as if I turn it an additional, it'll travel. How do I explain this? So if I turn the steering wheel 2 millimeters and it turns the wheels, let's say 5 degrees, then the next 2 millimeters that I turn the steering wheel, it's going to move the wheels another 5 degrees, and again the same thing all the way throughout. To every 2 millimeters of movement is going to produce the same 5 or 10% or whatever it is. Every increment is going to be the same. It's going to be linear. Now, exponential, on the other hand, what exponential typically does is you can have positive and negative differential, or I'm sorry, exponential. Negative exponential is typically what you see in airplanes, from what I've looked up on the internet. And basically, what it is negative exponential basically makes the movements softer around the middle of the stick. How do I explain this? Let me get my other transmitter here real quick. It would be easier to explain it on this transmitter, because this is essentially what most people are using it on anyway. So, okay, so if you don't have any exponential, essentially, you're going to get linear movement out of this stick, just like your steering wheel on the other transmitter. You're going to get linear movement in its whole range of motion. It's going to be linear. However, let's say you set the exponential to 50% or something like that. Well, essentially what that does is, well, okay, let's say 70%. Let's say you set it to negative 70%. So what that does is, if you move this stick all the way over to the left, unlike dual rate, you're still going to get 100% servo movement. But what's going to happen is the higher negative exponential that you have, the less reaction you're going to have out of the stick or out of the servo, the closer your stick is to center. So, you can basically make, sudden kind of twitchy movements around the center stick position, and the servo won't react very, if you get it set to like 70% negative, it's not going to react very much around the center of the stick. However, if you go all the way over, like I said, you're still going to get 100% movement out of the servo, unlike dual rate. So that's the difference. It's kind of the same, but it's almost kind of, it sounds kind of the same, but it's actually almost the opposite. One actually limits the maximum amount your servo can turn. The other one just limits how much it turns around center stick, essentially. And then I guess positive exponential. Now, bear in mind, I am not an expert guys, in this. This is just something I do for fun. I know quite a bit more than most of your beginners, and I know a little bit more than your average intermediate guy, but I am no expert. So this is some of this stuff that I'm covering in these videos is actually stuff that, like, the concept's not new to me, but it's some of this stuff is stuff I haven't really ever used myself, so I had to do some research to figure out, you know, kind of how it works or whatever. Or just get more detail so I can actually go into detail on some of the stuff, because some of it's, there's a couple areas where, like, I might only know, like, I might have a basic grasp of the concept, but since I never used it, I've never developed a deeper understanding of it. So actually doing this video series has been a big help for me, because I've actually learned quite a few things along the way too. But anyway, so positive, I'm assuming positive exponential would be like the exact opposite. If you actually set positive exponential, you're actually going to get more movement around center of stick than you will farther away from it. That's what I'm assuming. So anyway, getting back to this guy, because I'm mostly a ground vehicle guy. I'm just starting to get into helicopters, but that has not even been remotely a focus for me. Anyway, moving on past that, this particular controller, I don't know about a lot. I don't know about a lot of the other new ones. This particular controller has a setting for ABS brakes. Honestly, guys, this one it's one thing I forgot to look up, and I honestly don't know exactly how that works. I've never used it myself. I've never really had a need to, but I'm assuming it just keeps you from. I'm assuming it just keeps the kit from locking up if you give it too much brakes. But honestly, I really don't know. I haven't used it, so I apologize for my little gap in knowledge there. But I just simply haven't used it and forgot to look it up. And if it's something that sounds like it might be interesting for you to use, I suggest just doing some Google or YouTube searches. I'm sure you can find something. But anyway, so on this particular controller, not only can you change like the trim settings from the trim option on the controller, but there's actually buttons that you can control it with too. As you can see here, this is channel 1 trim or steering trim. N00 is basically no trim one way or the other, and then you can kind of tweak it left or right. And most controllers, including this one, have a set of trim buttons for all 3 channels. Steering is here, which is channel 1. Throttle trim is right here, which is channel 2, and channel 3 trim is actually down here. This is actually your 3-channel button. Your 3-channel button is usually going to be somewhere down around where your thumb can get to it. It's usually an on-off toggle switch on ground transmitters, but there's a handful of them that you can either mod, or some of the higher ones actually come with like a 3-position 3rd-channel switch. This one's not. It's just a simple 2-position on-off toggle. But there is a trim, and there is even actually a door rate control, mechanical door rate control down here for it. And that's pretty much all about the transmitter and your basic programming functions. Now, if you have a really high-end transmitter, you're liable to have extra features on that, which I haven't covered here, and you'll just have to kind of look those up on your own, or ask around in your forums or Facebook or whatever. I know some of the higher end controllers, like the the PK4 and the PL4, the Futabas, they have I believe they have a mixable third channel. And I haven't gotten into using things like that yet myself, so I'm not really going to go there. I'm just going to throw it out there that they do have things like that. And that's about it for this video. I've covered all the topics. So anyway, if you have any questions or comments for me, you can get a hold of me one of two ways. You can either get a hold of me via my Facebook page, which is www.facebook.com/GrayWolfStudios74, or you can send me an email at GrayWolfStudios74@gmail.com. And I appreciate you guys watching. If you enjoy my videos, or if you found them helpful, please subscribe, and feel free to share them wherever you want. That's it for this one. I'm out.